Well, if there is one interaction, first it was thousands, now it's lakhs, and I'm sure it's crores by now this show when the show will go on air, is Vallabh Bansali's comprehensive analysis on budget. His ability to connect the dots, pinpoint the actionable points, talk about what the vision of the government is, and then really keep it simple that what it means for you and me is quite impeccable. So as always, I would start the show by welcoming Vallabh Bansali on ET Now, and I would use that same term I used last time, that it is always a pleasure and an honor to host him on ET Now.
Thank you very much. My greetings to your viewers. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Mr. Bansali, the budget. And the big picture is there seems to be a recognition about the problems in the economy, which is the consumption, and there seems to be a pivot by the government in terms of moving and taking actionable steps. So can I say this budget has delivered much more than what everybody was anticipating?
Well, not everybody. I think there are many constituencies who are looking at India slightly differently. There are, two, three contexts in which we must see India. One, we are not looking at the marginal growth as in the past. We have set ourselves the goal of Viksit Bharat. If we are serious about it, we have to take steps towards it. And I think the finance minister spoke on several occasions that this is linked to the Viksit Bharat. Now, the path to that is not that easy. It's not even known. But consciousness of the government that, we have to take steps that will take us there was very much evident. The second was the global context. And that is that, the way rupee dollar has behaved, the fact that, we have tried to raise international bonds and that is still early, the fact that we want to revise our international rating, and of course, the immediate need for boost to consumption. So I think there were multiple issues. The biggest of all is the ease of doing business. And therefore, you heard sounds, heard government intent. So I think this budget has been very, very good in terms of intent, in terms of its sensitivity to the factors that need to be taken into account. So I would give her very high marks for being that. When it comes to action also, because their mere sensitivity intent were not enough, I think they've taken some very precipitate actions. One can always, ask for more actions. And I think that pressure on the government must remain, that if we have to become Viksit Bharat, there are political challenges, there will be fiscal challenges, but that desperation and ambition must remain. So that's how I would contextualize, I would frame the budget.
Mr. Bansali, I distinctly remember we had a conversation in 2001 on the eve when the budget was tabled. And that time the tone and the tonality was very different. It was all about kickstarting the broken investment cycle. The expenditure commitments were taken higher. There seems to be a different approach this time. Is this the right approach?
Therefore, in the context of global factor and desire for higher rating, the glide path to fiscal consolidation was very much kept in mind. I, for one, would have liked slightly higher fiscal deficit, because along with consumption, we also need an investment boost, because that investment cycle is still not really where it needs to be. But to the credit of the government, I think they seem to have recognized that what will matter more is probably filling in the gaps such as R&D. And, out of that 1 lakh crore budget, which 1 crore lakh 50-year window or 1 year 50-year grant that the government had thought of, the finance minister has allocated 20,000 crores. Now, I think ideas like that, or, this committee on high-level committee on reform for what they still call ease of doing business. So I think these are the important things at this point of time. And of course, one just can't praise the government enough for being very bold about the tax cut. They were not marginal. So they've not been marginal in many, many cases. So, for example, when it came to revision of MSME definition, they have not done tokenism. They've gone say, all right, you can invest up to 2.5 times. Your turnover is going to become 2 times that's the new benchmark. Or even for Kisan credit card, they've jumped from 3 lakhs to 5 lakhs. They started with, I think, if I remember correctly, 25,000 or something, and there is no more tokenism. So therefore, the boldness is there. Obviously, on every front, they couldn't move because of the fiscal constraint. One thing that not everyone may have noticed is that how the government is very conscious that there is a debt trap that a lot of countries are facing, whether they are advanced or not. And they want to stay very clear, which is our tradition, right? The whole story began in 91 when we showed that we don't want a default. We will do whatever it takes. And that is the Indian way of doing things. Saak, ek baar ijjat gayi to sab kuch gaya. So we are very conscious we don't want to go near. And therefore, how we are moving towards 55% debt to GDP ratio, that has also been kept in mind. So I think there was a very delicate balancing act, and they have been aggressive where they could be. As I said, we can always ask for more.
Mr. Bansali, the hallmark of the Finance Minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman budgets have been that they've been very clear, effective, comprehensive and conservative. But this time there are some assumptions which some would argue and say that are they slightly aggressive, especially on the tax front, the revenue growth assumption? Because one side you are cutting the spends down, you are walking towards a glide path which is committed towards fiscal deficit, and 1 lakh crore of additional direct taxes would not kick in. So the assumption for the first time for FY26, at least on the revenue front, are they realistic or aggressive?
You look at the composition of our tax now, that if you boost consumption, you're boosting GST collection. So, then we are looking at 8,000 crores of additional boost to consumption, and hopefully that will translate into that much GST. This now year's, the latest number has been a very good number, 1.96 lakh crores, a growth of 12.5%. So, if you were to look at that additional 8,000 rupees per month that you want on a base of 2 lakh crores, I believe that the average will move towards 2 lakh crores in this year. That's about 4%. So I think this 1 lakh crore has a psychological benefit, and it has a direct financial implication. The psychological benefit is much more. Take a household with double income, with many households are, with high propensity to consume. A couple with 25 lakhs of salaried income today doesn't pay tax. I think that's just a wonderful feeling. And there are many households of that kind who have high propensity to consume. And therefore, I think the result of higher spending on GST collection and even corporate profits, who will see now this consumption coming back, and therefore how they want to invest in the economy, etc. So if you look at direct tax, indirect tax all put together, I don't see that very aggressive. I think also the fact that the world was in a lot of uncertainty with elections and US elections and so on, if US returns to aggressive growth as it seems to be, I think that will also help the global growth. If China and US reach some kind of understanding, even otherwise, look at the kind of boost that Chinese economy has given, and therefore, if the number one and number two economies are on expansion effort, I think some of that benefit will come into global growth also. Hopefully, the end of the war in Middle East, hopefully end of war in Ukraine will also create a better atmosphere for growth. So I don't really worry, or I think it's too soon to say this revenue estimate is too aggressive.
And a great point, sir. I'll also take the conversation back and talk about in terms of the future growth frontiers which the government has identified. I'll elaborate this question just for the benefit of our viewers. 20 years ago, IT services were considered to be high growth. Today, they are considered to be mature. So in terms of in government focus, there are a lot of industries which have been mentioned. But where do you think there is a government acknowledgement, willingness of the entrepreneur and talent availability in terms of the skill set? What to your mind, budget, no budget, are the future high growth sunrise sectors of India?
The whole manufacturing sector has still not really got into the serious animal spirit that we need to. So therefore, this whole PIL scheme, which has enabled several industries to come up, if there are any gaps in the PIL industry, PLI scheme, we need to look at that and boost that manufacturing. So I think manufacturing clearly, we can see the multiples on companies like Dixon and other, manufacturing outsourcing services. And I think these can expand massively. So I think that's one area that is likely to do well. And I think we need to provide enough boost to that. As far as IT is concerned, IT is getting redefined. IT was just software services on a global delivery basis. Now IT, the budget, the framework has, when I did the Infosys IPO, we were still going from mainframe to PC. You can imagine what it was then. And then they grew for, they've sustained this country. If anything, is the 91 reforms of Narasimha Rao and then the leadership of Narayan Murthy. They have sustained us to, bring us to $250 billion in exports and all the good that it does. Now, it has to be new areas. It has to be IT. It has to be, data sciences. And government has already announced, this is such a significant thing, that in 10 months, we will have our own LLM models, etc. AI is a definite thing that we need. Government has also announced some very interesting stuff on semiconductor, chip design, etc. So this IT has to be expanded into newer areas. We don't have too many companies listed on the market, but there are a number of startups that are coming into these areas. They need a boost. Space and IT are getting merged. Similarly, medical services and IT, they are converging in so many places. So IT has to be looked at in a very different manner. It's the early days. Say, for example, one part of IT, SaaS. SaaS has grown so well. A lot of Indian companies are just focused on providing their SaaS service. This is all going to get redefined with, with our AI. So I think, obviously, everything matures. Nothing is going to remain the same. The world is competitive. Technology is a mother killer. So I think on the whole, this has to be used as a platform to grow new IT areas, grow into new IT areas. I think the government has shown enough consciousness. I talked earlier about fellowships and things like that. We had a ready base of engineers for the skills that were required then. We may not have as much of a ready base, but if we start now, we will catch up very soon. After all, we must get inspired that Chandrayaan was 2% of NASA's cost. We must learn to do what America is doing at 2 to 5% of the cost that it incurs. China has already shown the way. And there are very interesting aspects, which is not the right day to get into greater detail as to how it can be done. But so I think more work is necessary, but our opportunity in that, I think, is a very significant one.
So we rarely get a chance to talk to you. So every time I get a chance, I want to ask a question on behalf of viewers, which is, again, I'll pick it up from where we left our last conversation. You did express that the public market and the private markets 6-8 months ago were running ahead of themselves, which is that markets were factoring in too much of good news too quickly and far ahead of its time. We've seen a sizable correction. How do you see markets moving? And if I may add one more point, which is that in terms of this whole hullabaloo about large cap versus small cap, what are your thoughts?
So I think this budget has provided some kind of sustenance to high valuations that people had. Market came up because under its own weight, and serious amount of money being raised by way of public issues and QIPs and so on. So obviously that money, goes away from the market. But now with this budget, with the boost to consumption, this good number of 2 lakh crores for January, there is this greater sustenance to the bulls. Where the valuations are for different buckets in the market is something that requires microanalysis, and I'm no good at it, or I wouldn't want to talk about it. So I think this budget has come at the right time for the bulls. Uh, if the growth comes back, I think it's a month-on-month story that we will have to watch. We will have to watch that the government has said that most of the money that they allocated for capital expenditure will get spent in this year. All the balance money, if that gets spent very quickly in February and March, I think it will again create a boost. So I think we have no choice but to continue relentlessly on all the fronts for the markets to be as good as they were. In 6 months, book value grows. It starts growing significantly because the corporate performance continues to be quite satisfactory. It may not be what it was a few years, last year, post-COVID years, that was extraordinary. But there are, in some of the industrial houses are investing very large and serious amounts of money, which was not there a few years ago, which all will convert into turnover and profits in due course. So I think we have a greater justification for some of our price levels.
So, Mr. Bansali, why is there this whole hullabaloo about private sector capex not picking up? Are we looking at different terrain rather than looking at where the money is moving? I mean, we are accustomed to thinking big land and big buildings created, and that is the definition of private sector capex. But this time it is moving into smaller batteries and small semiconductors, and we just are not recognizing it.
Well, the big buildings are so evident, they catch your attention and you see them every day. Therefore, that impression consolidates. So I think that's okay. But it's still a small part of the total economy. Our economy is now, $4 trillion economy. And some of these things, moving here and there won't make a difference. But just since you mentioned buildings and all, real estate is a very, very significant sector for us. It's still a very small, the organized real estate sector in India is still very small. If this credit and consumption, are being pushed the way they are, I think there's a long way to go. But I think one cannot say that the private sector is not participating in the investment. I think the biggies have started to, not at every level you see this. I think major issue there is the way we do business. The way we need to do business has to change dramatically. We cannot grudge small changes and small reliefs. The government, and I think in recognition, has set up this committee. It reflects its intent to make big changes. I know that they've been talking to various people, and they have shown intent that we will continue to talk. Budget was a milestone that they have to be careful about. But I think if the seriousness that we have seen in some of the conversation continues, I think when that is announced, serious, dramatic way, or as I hope, alternative way of doing business comes about. History of this country for the last 5,000 years, and if not 5,000, but say 2.5, 3,000 years, has been one of enterprise. We have not let enterprise take the place that it deserves to in a country like India. So we have raised ambitions, but we have still, there are too many gates to cross, too many hurdles to jump over. I think that's when serious enterprise money, serious enterprise, lot of private sector investment will happen. I have just no doubt about it. We are underestimating the difficulty that the way business has to be done in India is posing.
So I'll wrap it up with one final question, and it perhaps is repetitive to some of the points you've just mentioned, but like I said, that I always seamlessly use the opportunity to get more and more from your wisdom for the benefit of our viewers. The whole talk of the slowdown in the economy, where at least one can now see the slowdown and also smell the slowdown and feel the slowdown. Post today's budget, can one be reasonably confident that the slowdown is not structural, it is cyclical, and the recovery is round the corner and it will come back before we realize?
See, some of the slowdown was definitely on account of the election year, slowdown in government expenditure. The government itself has admitted this. And therefore, there was no denying that there was slowdown in several sectors in the economy. But in the last quarter, in November, December, number of companies started saying that rural demand, etc., is coming back. We have had an excellent crop. And with this kind of consumption boost provided by the budget, I think whatever slowdown that we looked at, as I said, the government must spend the balance of money, which they said they will achieve the capital expenditure target this year. I think all those three things happened, or two things have happened. Some turnaround has happened, tax cut has happened, and if the government spent the money that it has promised to, I think that slowness will be a thing of the past. So I don't see an issue really if all these things get done.
Mr. Bansali, truly, truly grateful to you, sir. And thank you on behalf of everyone for your valuable time. First, sir, it was thousands who would track you. Then soon it became lakhs. But I'm sure this interview would be appreciated by crores who always lean up to you for your wisdom.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.